Welcome in, Hokies fans, to this edition of the Tech Sideline podcast. We record on Wednesday, November 16th, as we get you ready for Saturday's game on the road at Liberty. On today's episode, we'll discuss how a very well-coached Flames team has been a tough matchup for many opponents this season and how they'll stack up against the Hokies. And later, we'll preview the Charleston Classic. All that and more coming up on episode 272 of the Tech Sideline podcast, which starts right now. We welcome you in whether you are listening or watching on YouTube. If you are on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe while you're there, and also turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future podcasts. This edition of the Tech Sideline podcast is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference in your overall experience. First Bank and Trust Company is the bank that puts you first. Visit www.firstbank.com to learn more. Let's go ahead and introduce the crew for today. On set, we have Will Stewart, founder and general manager of Tech Sideline across the way. To my right is Chris Coleman, lead analyst and columnist for Tech Sideline. In the fourth chair is Carter Hill. Behind the scenes producing is Nick Brown, and I'm your host for today, Katie Adams. This week, Virginia Tech travels just up the road to Lynchburg to take on the Liberty Flames. And these two teams with very different trajectories on the season. Virginia Tech at 2-8 and Liberty at 8-2. Previously an AP top 25 team, but an impressive season led by Hugh Freeze, that's for sure.
I think it's one of his best coaching jobs so far at Liberty because they lost Malik Willis. Now, they only went 8-5 last year with Malik Willis, and now they're 8-2. Without him, and I think that says a lot about their coaching ability this year. Their defense has been strong. They've been opportunistic. They've been good in the fourth quarter. They haven't gone out there and dominated games, with the exception of the BYU game. Other than that, every other team they've played has had a chance to beat them, I guess, with the exception of UMass. But Liberty's gotten it done in the fourth quarter more times than not. So good coaching job.
Not only did he lose Malik Willis, but he lost Brewer. What's this Brewer's name?
This Brewer's name is Charlie.
Currently on the roster still, which we'll get into.
Right.
Lost him to injury.
You're right. He was supposed to be their starting quarterback.
Yeah.
Hugh Freeze, 34-13 since being hired at Liberty back in 2019. A name to watch probably for future coaching vacancies, but I know he just signed a contract last month, I think.
$5 million a year?
Yeah, right? Keeps him at Liberty through 2030, which Liberty might end up being the perfect place for Hugh Freeze. I know he's had a resurgence as a man since he got there.
The thing is, if you hire Hugh Freeze, you're immediately on the radar of the NCAA.
Yeah.
Just because of his past history. So that's a risky hire for anybody, but he is a good coach. Clearly, he's a good coach.
Well, Liberty's kind of like the Honey Badger; they don't really care,
Right.
I described them in my section of our preview as a school that is on a mission when it comes to football, and certainly, let's see if I can remember off the top of my head without pulling up the preview and reading it. They started their program in 1973. They were NAIA until 81 when they were Division II. Then they went to FCS in 1988, and then they became a full-time FBS member in 2018. So they've clearly had a plan the whole time, and they've got fantastic facilities, and so they're, like I said, they're a school on a mission.
I'm sure they're very excited to welcome Virginia Tech to their stadium this weekend. Unfortunately, playing at ODU and playing at Liberty in the same year isn't my favorite thing to do, but we can go ahead and talk more about this team. Just 4 points separates them from being 10-0 and undefeated. So let's take a look at their schedule. As an independent team, they had a pretty decent schedule. They scheduled 2 ACC teams, an SEC team, BYU, of course, another independent, but a respectable team, of course. But they stacked up a good amount of wins. I mean, Arkansas on the road, that's impressive.
Yeah, I mean,
that's very impressive.
Yeah, you go on the road and you beat an SEC team. A little bit of that is like Liberty jumped up 21-0, and I think some of that is Arkansas being like, "Who's Liberty?"
Yeah, right.
And then they score the last 19 points of the game, but that's not enough.
So that wound up a 21-19 win for Liberty.
Right. Still, you go in there and win that game. That's you. You earned it. They earned that win. They have a large number of games in here that have been so close. Like they beat Southern Miss by 2 in 4 overtimes. They beat UAB by 7. They beat a bad Akron team by 9, and that was a 2-point game with under 5 minutes left. Old Dominion, they beat by 2 touchdowns, but late in the third quarter, that game was tied 24-24. Gardner-Webb, a mediocre 500 FCS team, Liberty only beat them by 1 point, and they actually trailed by 6 with around 5 minutes left. So basically, like Liberty, they do just enough to win, whether they're playing a bad Gardner-Webb team at home or a pretty good Arkansas team on the road.
And Wake Forest on the road.
And Wake Forest.
I remember watching
Right.
that game. It
And
was
then
so
that was
fun
that was
to watch.
a 1-point loss.
Right.
Yeah.
to Wake
Right.
Forest
And
on
then
the road.
a lot of the reason is their offense is not good at all. They've started 3 different quarterbacks this year. Again, partly because of injury, some to Brewer, but their third string quarterback, who they were using some, he got hurt as well. And they turn the ball over a lot. They're one of the worst teams in the country when it comes to turning the ball over. But their defense makes up for it by being one of the best teams in the country and forcing turnovers.
Yeah, so their turnover margin isn't that bad.
It's +1 actually, but they're I don't think I've ever seen such a spread. It almost seems like their offense throws an interception and then the defense will get it right back with an interception of their own.
Before we talk about the offense, one more quick note about this game. At the beginning of the season, it was talked about how this schedule was the most distance-friendly for Virginia Tech in quite some time. 11 out of 12 games being played in Virginia or North Carolina. But this is a game that you might want to stay far away from, although if you're watching it from home, the broadcast situation does not sound too promising.
Yeah, it does not. Obviously, it's an ESPN Plus game. And I think I read on Twitter yesterday, I think it was a Clark Rulin tweet, that the last time Virginia Tech played a game that wasn't televised at all was the Temple game in 2003. I think that's right.
Did we win or lose?
Yeah. And Virginia Tech, I think it went to overtime, and Temple missed an extra point, and Virginia Tech won by. That was when the Hokies were in the middle of melting down late in 2003.
They were totally nosediving, and I remember listening to that on the radio. So
this is going to be an ESPN Plus game at Liberty. That means it's an in-house Liberty production, which means there'll probably be limited camera angles and replays and
pay
things
attention,
like that.
folks. This is important.
And it's going to be Liberty announcers, basically. Liberty bias, Liberty influence, maybe Liberty employed announcers. So it's going to be a 3-hour celebration of Liberty football.
This is also important for the 3 of us who have to talk about this game next week when none of us are going to the game. So I don't know how the analyzation is going to be in regards to that if there's not good camera angles, or if there's not a condensed game on YouTube. I mean, it's a problem.
I know that for me, with the games being on RSN, I haven't seen the most recent games other than seeing them in person and maybe watching a condensed version on YouTube.
No, they don't do the condensed version on YouTube for RSN games.
Well, so like the last 3 games have been on RSN, is that right?
I don't know.
But they actually did do condensed versions for 2 of the 3.
Did they really?
It was one of the.
They didn't last week.
They did the most recent one.
They hadn't done one for.
Well, I've linked it in our schedule. It's there.
Maybe they did. Okay.
No, but to your point, I think they actually have to wait like 3 or 4 days before they can do it. Usually the ACC Digital Network gets a condensed version up in a hurry. But I've noticed for the RSN games, if they do it at all, it's like days later. So there must be some weird rights thing there.
Something tells me we're probably not going to want to go back and watch it if things go as they've been going all season.
Well, as media, it's kind of difficult because the people who are there covering it are seeing it live and they're tweeting about it. Streams, which we'll all be forced to watch this on a stream, they run 1 minute to 2 minutes behind.
That's true.
So if you're following, like David Cunningham's not going to be covering it for us, Jack Brizendine is. If you're following Andy Bitter or Jack Brizendine, they're going to be telling you stuff. Or if you're looking at the live stats.
So you have to train yourself to not be on your phone during the game, basically.
Well, I was actually thinking about that this morning. Do I actually want to watch the live stats so I know what's coming on the stream like 2 plays later, or what?
I think I'm going to be glued to my phone the whole time. If you're there, make sure you have the most in-depth tweets possible to help all of us who aren't there.
Right.
But we can go ahead and get into this matchup, specifically the Liberty offense and their quarterback position, because they faced some adversity there, like you all said earlier. Let's start with the player who we probably won't see, who has a familiar last name, with Charlie Brewer. He's certainly taken advantage of the transfer portal. He's on his 3rd school with the Flames, but a disappointing season for him.
He's been a good quarterback in his career. He's had a bunch of concussion issues. Played for Utah and Baylor.
Right.
And has good numbers for his career. Came to Liberty this year, and 4 passes into the first game, he broke his throwing hand.
Brutal.
Horrible. And he's come back and played in one game. I believe it was maybe the BYU game. He had 2 carries. But
I think you said that,
but they haven't let him throw it. They still list him on the depth chart as an or. Jonathan Bennett, who is been their starter recently, it's Jonathan Bennett or actually they do or for all 3 quarterbacks, which is kind of silly. Brewer, to me, when he's healthy and he's not rusty, is far and away their best quarterback. Yeah. These other quarterbacks are completely mediocre. So you're sitting here saying, oh, they're 8-2. They've had a lot of close wins, but at the same time, both their losses have been down to the wire as well. So with Brewer, they could conceivably be 10-0 right now.
Yeah.
I know he returned to practice last week. Hugh Freeze mentioned in the presser, I didn't think he could throw it last week well enough. It was too many turnovers in practice. I hate it for him the way the season has gone. Hopefully this week is different and it shows up differently. So there's a potential to see him. I don't know if Michael Brewer's going to be in the stands. That'd be interesting. But, I mean, he's rusty if he comes back at all.
Football has been a rough game for the Brewer brothers, man.
Yes. Oh, yeah, it has.
How early did he get hurt in that Ohio State game? It was right before halftime?
Yeah.
It was right after halftime.
Okay.
Was it right after?
Because Tech scored on their last drive right before halftime and took the halftime lead.
Was that the Sam Rogers play?
I don't remember.
Right before halftime?
I think they scored on a Ryan Malik touchdown before halftime.
Yeah, it was a throwback.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
I just remember the Sam Rogers play because I've got it on YouTube. I actually put it on Tech Sideline's YouTube years ago, and it's fun to go back and watch.
Scott Loeffler dialed up his best games for Ohio State as a Michigan man. By the way, he got Bowling Green bowl eligible last night.
Yep. It was interesting to tune in and see him running out of the tunnel.
Bill Rolf's calling Maction tonight.
Maction.
Really?
Yep.
There's been football every single day, and it's thanks to Tuesday, Wednesday Maction.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the conferences, can't remember which one it is, might be Conference USA, has also signed a contract to do Tuesday, Wednesday games. Yep. And to go on a tangent, I know we're here to talk about Virginia Tech and Liberty, but what Maction has done to attendance at the MAC football schools is an interesting topic to study. As you can imagine, attendance has plummeted at their games because they literally, I can't remember the details of the article because I read it a couple of years ago, but there were statements to the effect of there was not a single MAC game played on Saturday. They're playing a bunch of them during the week now, particularly in the month of November as things are coming down to the finish. And, Major League Baseball rotates out, so ESPN needs the inventory, so they're going to the MAC for it. And they're playing during the week, and it's killing the next generation of fans because they're not actually going to the games. They're just sitting at home on a weeknight and watching it on TV. So
I remember playing at Western Michigan that year, and it was sold out. It was like 30,000 people in a 30,000-seat stadium. It was a really good atmosphere.
And that's typically what, back in the day, you could expect from a MAC team, a smaller stadium, but they filled it because, up in that area of the country, football is very important, but television rules, you know how that works.
I wish Thursday Night Football still had the glamour that it used to, and now it's just like the games that no one wants to watch, like Georgia Tech and UVA. And NC State, Virginia Tech ended up being kind of decent, but, well, given Charlie Brewer's status, incomes, Caden Salter, and Jonathan Bennett likely to get the start on Saturday. He did lead their wins against BYU and Arkansas, but a decent quarterback.
Yeah, he's had his moments. I'll put it that way. But overall, his numbers are not good for a modern quarterback. 58.7%, 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Right. Overall, as a team, they throw a ton of picks. I want to say they've thrown
14 or 15.
14 or 15 as a team, something like that. And he's limited because he's only got one good wide receiver. They've got a wide receiver, Demario Douglas, with 57 catches. Nobody else has caught more than 19 receptions. Yeah. And things could be even worse for them this week because they've lost their leading rusher for the season now.
Yep, we can go ahead and move on to the running backs. That's another position that, Liberty could be 10-0 moving forward if Day Hunter had not gotten hurt.
Yeah, and he missed the game last week. Now their third string, and that's also their backup, missed the game last week to attend the funeral of his father. So they were kind of down.
Was that Shedro Lewis that missed it? Is that who you're talking about?
That's correct. But they put their third string in, and he still rushed for 114 yards.
So a strength of their offense had been their run game, but
Yeah.
now it's a little adjusted this week, obviously, with Day Hunter not in the mix, and then Shedro Lewis might be a little rusty, hasn't played in 2 weeks. I don't know who their third guy being TJ Green, who started the game last week against UConn. He's a Utah transfer.
Done nothing all year until last week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to put that in context, Hunter was up to 130 rushes, 854 yards, 6.6 per carry.
Good back. Yeah.
So he was headed for a 1,000-yard season.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
Unfortunate for him.
And so you don't know how much that changes thing. It hurt them last week, but at the same time, it didn't hurt them because their third string came in and had a 100-yard game. Still, you like to have all your guys available to you, especially when your passing game is so limited. So this is a Liberty offense. I mean, you just look at their point totals this year. Southern Miss, they scored 29, but it was in 4 overtimes. UAB, they scored 21. They did score 36 on Wake. They only scored 21 against a bad Akron team. Then 38 and 42 against bad Old Dominion and UMass teams. Then only 21 against NFBS Gardner-Webb. Then 41 against BYU. Then 21 against Arkansas. So they've been up and down. But generally speaking, their statistics on offense this year are extremely mediocre, maybe even slightly below average.
Yeah, there's nothing that stands out.
And theoretically, they shouldn't be as good without their starting running back now. And they turn the ball over a ton. They're good at hitting big plays, generating big plays. They're the type of offense that will do nothing for two or three straight drives and then, boom, hit a big play and score when you're asleep. Basically.
So you talked about how Douglas has 57 catches. Nobody else has more than 19. But Noah Frith, who has 19 catches, averages 18.7 yards per catch. Right. So to your point, they can hit some long gainers.
Yeah, and their third leading receiver is Hunter, their running back.
No.
So you can count him out this week, too.
Right.
So they're very limited in their options in throwing the football.
I'm going to say this wrong, and I meant to look it up before we got on the podcast, but I do know that you talked highly of Demario Douglas, and he's certainly going to be a weapon on Saturday. He's on the, I'm so embarrassed, I don't know how to say it, Biletnikoff Award watch list.
Biletnikoff.
Yes.
Fred Biletnikoff.
I should know how to say it, but I know that he's on the watch list for that.
Oh,
so
that hurts my soul. Biletnikoff was the man when I was a kid. He was a wide receiver for the Raiders.
And Florida State.
Yeah, well, that's how a lot of old school Tech fans know him, is that he played for Florida State and he played in the old, I think it was Miles Stadium.
Yeah.
I won't go down that rabbit hole. I think it was Biletnikoff that was famous for having the sticky stuff on his fingers when he was playing football.
Biletnikoff. Okay, I'm gonna remember. I'm so embarrassed.
First name Fred.
Fred Biletnikoff.
Fred Biletnikoff.
So Jordan Addison won that award last year, I believe. Now I think it was the assumption that Josh Downs would win, but I don't know who's going to win it this year.
I don't know. I haven't been following it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can talk more about that wide receiver position. Douglas obviously spends most of the time in the slot, like you said, 830 yards on the year, so he could be due for a 1,000-yard season.
He could be, and he'll at this point he would be on pace to get it. Especially when you consider that they'll play in a bowl game.
Right.
Yeah. So I think he probably will get that. I wish he was an outside receiver because I would honestly rather have Mansour Delane matched up against him half the time.
That's what I was going to ask. Who would likely be covering him?
If Virginia Tech is in a nickel package, it would be Chamari Connor. If they're in their regular defense, then they would be lined up. Assuming he's on the wide side of the field, then you'd have Keonta Jenkins over top of him and kind of a zone type coverage. I would rather have Mansour Delane on him personally.
Yes, I would agree.
Yep.
Yeah, he's a little guy, 5'8", 170, but clearly productive.
Yeah, they don't have good productive talent at outside receiver at all.
Yeah.
And when you look at their record, you think they have a bunch of good players, right? But they don't. They just win.
Yeah.
They're well coached and they win.
So are you going to read like the 11 starting? Not now, but when we get to the defense.
I didn't print it out, but I probably.
I was going to cue you up to talk about that.
Yeah.
So
we can pull it up on the phone.
That's true. We'll talk about that
interesting stuff
later.
looking at their defense.
Yeah, more to get to on the offense, but want to throw it over to Carter for the first time.
As always, let's lead it off with Stat Time with Scott Glessner. It is not upside down today. Last week it was upside down.
You got it right.
So he first comes prepared with, since joining the ACC, this will be Virginia Tech's 6th out-of-conference opponent in the month of November. They are 3-2 in those matchups. 2006, they beat Kent State. Speaking of action,
That that was a bye game, and now
We've talked about the Kent State game so much.
now if you want Kent State, you have to pay $1.9 million for them for a bye game.
right?
Because Virginia Tech could go. This is another tangent, but back then when Tech first joined the ACC teams' payouts per team were higher than any other conference. So Virginia Tech was getting
Conference revenue payouts.
conference revenue payouts. So Virginia Tech was getting more money from their TV contract, basically, than Georgia was back in 2006.
That's right.
So Virginia Tech could afford games like that back then.
Relatively speaking.
And now we have to schedule your liberties and ODUs because it's either that or pay Kent State $1.9 million.
Yeah, which isn't going
Right.
to happen.
Bill Roth will be talking a lot about Kent State football tonight. I think he's calling that game with Eastern Michigan up in Kent, Ohio. They beat East Carolina in 2009. They beat Notre Dame in 2016, so they got off to a 3-0 start. That was that snowy game in South Bend.
So
They lost to Notre Dame in 2019, and of course they lost to Liberty in 2020.
right. And remember the Liberty game in 2020 was not originally supposed to be in November. It was supposed to be like the second game of the season because they had to shuffle the schedule because of COVID.
That's right. Forgot about that. There was a
So-
lot of shuffling that year.
Yeah, there was a
NC
lot of
State,
shuffling.
Virginia. Virginia Tech has only visited the red zone 23 times this season. That is the fourth worst. UMass only has 22. Iowa only has 21. So they're
Oh my
the only
God.
Power 5 team that is worse than the Hokies. Colorado State also has 21. In comparison, Georgia has visited the red zone 56 times. So that is 2.5 times more than Tech has visited. the
Roughly, yes, almost
Tech,
exactly.
So Tech is averaging 2.3 red zone trips per game.
Yeah.
I wonder how many of those were against Wofford.
This is interesting too. Got one more from Scott. Virginia Tech's offense is tied for 129th out of 131 teams in fourth down conversion percentage. Virginia Tech's defense is tied for 117th for allowing fourth down conversions.
I'm going to issue a challenge to Scott Glessner.
Okay.
Find us a good offensive stat.
It's not been the year for that, unfortunately.
No.
We can go ahead and talk about their offensive line. Liberty is similar to Duke in the sense that it's a very transfer-led O-line, brought 3 people in from the transfer portal, and they all were good enough to start for them.
Yeah, and it's also helped them create depth because they do rotate in one center, one guard, and one tackle off the bench. So they've got a little bit of a rotation going, and they've actually got some of their backups have played major snaps for them in the past. So they upgraded their talent level, but the guys that they replaced in the starting lineup did decide to stay, and now they're in the rotation, and it helps keep everybody fresh. They're not a dominant offensive line. They've been good in pass protection, kind of middling when it comes to run blocking. I mean, honestly, their offense across the board, with the exception of Douglas at wide receiver, is pretty mediocre. One of their tackles, I think it's Gadlin on the right tackle, has been very good.
You're not going to try to pronounce that first name?
Absolutely
That's
not.
why I'm sitting here staring at the roster card. His name, I'll spell it for you. X-Zauvea. Gadlin.
Zueva or something
Xavier.
like that.
Xavier.
Carter, can you see
Xavier
if they-
Gadlin.
Yeah.
Can you
that
look
could be it.
Gadlin? I'd love to know how to pronounce it. I'm just curious.
Yeah,
Can
if
you
there's a
look it up and see if they've
pronunciation
got
on Liberty.
What's his name? What's his number?
Number
Number
73.
73.
Number 73.
I'm sure the Liberty announcers will let you know on Saturday.
They'll let us know.
They'll have it memorized backwards
Speaking
and
of
forwards.
their offensive line, how many of our offensive line members are we losing this offseason? Is it Silas,
Definitely lose
Johnny
Janzy.
Jordan,
Those are the only 2.
and Bob Schick?
I don't think I think Schick is only technically like a redshirt sophomore, I think.
Yeah, I think he's
All right, so
got-
he went on a mission out of high school, and then he went to JUCO for a year.
Yeah, he's listed as a redshirt sophomore.
Yeah,
Bob Schick is.
right.
Okay.
And so last year, so his JUCO year was in 2020, so it shouldn't have counted. So then technically he was a freshman last year, even though he was like 22 years old or something. And so he's a redshirt sophomore now, I guess, maybe. I don't know how it works. But anyway, he's coming back, or he can come back.
I guess I was just wondering if we would be on a similar pursuit to get guys from the transfer portal
We
for
better
our
be.
offensive line.
We better be. Because
Yeah,
worked out for these
Virginia Tech's
teams.
problem isn't number of bodies; it's the positions they play. you
we
know?
like one of the issues, again, we've talked about this, why the Tech defense has struggled to generate a pass rush this year is because they're not getting a good look in practice because there's no depth on Tech's offensive line. I mean, I've basically the time I went to practice, I saw J.C. Price about to just lose his mind because the backup linemen weren't giving good
Backup
reps.
offensive linemen weren't getting,
particularly the tackles.
Yeah.
So like, pass protection has been bad the last 3 games.
Yeah.
Now, if we had to play our backup offensive tackle, it would be awful. It would be a disaster. I'm not saying it's not a disaster now because we're bad, but it would be even worse. So what did we say the other day? The S&P Plus. There's only been like
Virginia Tech's offense is currently
3rd or 4th worst since 2005.
Since 2005, 1,100 and some.
Well, if we had to play the backup offensive tackles,
I think they dropped a second or
maybe
first
yeah,
worst.
it's that bad. So yes, transfer portal offensive lineman is very important. That's concerning because they tried last year to hit the portal for at least one offensive lineman. I think they wanted to take a true tackle and then maybe a swing guy, and they failed. They didn't get anybody. So you've seen Duke take 3 guys from the portal that became starters. You've seen Liberty take 3 guys from the portal that could be starters, and Virginia Tech struck out.
Yeah.
So they are going to have to do a much, much better job. I mean, yeah, you can sit here and say, yeah, they're going to fix some things by hitting the portal. Well, they tried to fix some things by hitting the portal last year, and they didn't. So they've got to do a better job on that.
So is it possible that if you think about the timing of everything, Pry was hired in.
I know where you're going with this.
But he was putting his analyst staff together.
Mm-hmm.
So they may not have had the research and the background that they needed.
Well, maybe you're right, but what's the excuse for Mike Elko, who was hired a week after Brent Pry? He was able to find 3 starting offensive linemen at Duke and a good linebacker and a starting corner, even though that one's not very good. So basically like 5 or 6 really key contributors that are having good seasons for Duke, and he was hired after Brent Pry.
Elko was a defensive coordinator, so it wasn't like he was sitting there looking.
And he came from Texas.
O lineman,
right?
Yeah, he was at Texas A&M,
right? So we don't have any written excuses. Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple of takeaways for this offense. Overall, like you said, they're one of the worst teams in the country at turning the ball over, and for an offense in Virginia Tech that struggles to score points, one of the keys to the game has to be winning that turnover margin and getting some points off of turnovers that they may.
It's kind of scary and also encouraging. So from one standpoint, Virginia Tech has had issues in certain games with turnovers, and Liberty forces a ton of turnovers.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Liberty turns it over a ton themselves, and so Virginia Tech, like if you feel like they're going to come away with some turnovers, it should be this week.
Yep.
Right. Now we'll see if that holds true, but if either team can manage to not turn it over this week, and then the other team has a turnover prone game, then that could give that team a big advantage. Now, obviously, Liberty has more room for error because their defense forces a lot of turnovers. Virginia Tech has no room for error. At least it doesn't seem like it. At least based on through 10 games, Virginia Tech has no room for error. Liberty doesn't have a lot either because they lack overall talent on offense, but they've got more room for error than Virginia Tech because their defense is better than Virginia Tech's.
So if you remember going into the Duke game, I believe the stat was Virginia Tech was at number 129 in the country in turnovers forced. So that's why the interception by Delane was such a big deal in that game. I literally think that was the 6th turnover Tech had forced all year or something like that. So you have a Liberty team that turns it over a lot facing a Virginia Tech defense that doesn't turn you over a lot. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And a little bit of breaking news, David Cunningham just texted us and said that Alan Tisdale says he is coming back next year. He's using his COVID year.
And he deserves it after the NCAA
Yeah,
screwed
he
him.
absolutely deserves it.
Oh my
He
God.
sure
He
does.
got
We never addressed it on the podcast, but yeah, I mean, he just got screwed.
And that's a big deal because Tisdale's a guy who, I don't know if he's graduated yet, but he would certainly graduate this year. And he's got a kid.
Yeah.
So part of you is thinking, okay, you got my degree. You need to go on and support my kid now. But he's choosing to play football for another year. And that's a good sign because I do think the defense has been better since he's returned. So hopefully that can provide some stability there next year. And that gives them the option to maybe try one of the other guys at Mike next year to fill that Dax Holyfield role when he leaves.
So correct me if I get any of this wrong, for those of you that because you're right, we never really covered it. He downloaded a betting app. Tisdale downloaded a betting app onto his phone. He bet on what? NBA games?
NBA Finals.
NBA Finals.
NBA Finals. He bet a bunch of small bets.
He won $41 and lost 6 games in his senior year.
And learned months later that that's against NCAA rules and turned himself in. And the NCAA suspended him for 9 games. And later they appealed it and it got knocked back to 6. And it's just ludicrous. We could rant and rave
Ludicrous
about
crap
this.
is what that
Yeah.
is.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Oh, man.
We could rant and rave about this for a while, but it's just, so we're all sitting there, and we have talked about this. We're all sitting there wondering what's going on with Tisdale. Why has he been demoted to scout team? What? It was just that.
It was just that. And Hugh Freeze, meanwhile, got Ole Miss put on probation for massive recruiting violations. Got traced to an escort service, all of that. He's allowed to coach. He doesn't really get punished.
And, we could
make $5 million a year. And there are certain athletic departments out there who are sponsored by apps like FanDuel and things like that. Like, so the athletic departments are making money off these gambling sites, but then he wins $41 on a sport that he doesn't even play. It's the most ridiculous. I mean, there were a number of articles written last week or the week before or whenever.
Yeah, it was a couple of weeks ago.
That was such an archaic rule, and the NCAA needs to come off that. And they're absolutely right. It's like the NCAA doesn't have any perception of what people are going to say about him. It's like, okay, he broke a rule, so here's the punishment, and they don't even think about anything else. It's like you would think that they would sit there and realize, man, this is really going to make us look bad if we do this.
Stupid.
Yeah. But they never do that.
They don't care.
Do you remember what Dave Doran said last year after the Holiday Bowl was canceled?
No.
He said the NCAA stands for no clue at all.
Yeah.
That is so obvious. Why hasn't anybody said that before then?
Well, that's going to wrap up the first half. But before we break, let's check back in with Carter.
Well, first, Chris, Scott was up for the challenge.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my gosh.
One positive offensive stat. Virginia Tech has more 300-yard passing games this season than all of 2020 and 2021. They have
Combined?
one this year.
Wow.
They didn't have any the last 2 seasons, which is kind of surprising.
Okay, so it's a
to me.
relative positive.
Relative positive.
Did you just say in different words that in this 2020 and 2021 seasons, no Virginia Tech quarterback threw for over 300 yards?
Well, we
in
knew
a
that
game?
last year.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
He was
We're all
supposed to
stumped
cheer
here.
us up.
Yeah.
Sorry, what'd you say,
That's
Kate?
something.
I was just like, we're all stumped here, like staring in a blank
Like,
space.
really?
What is happening?
Which game did we throw for 300 yards this year? Wofford?
I don't think so.
Scott,
You gotta look it up.
let us know.
Let us know.
Meanwhile, we have a quarterback who almost averaged 300 yards a game last year at Marshall.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, Damian Salas helped me out with this. This is the first time the Hokies have played in Lynchburg since 1949.
Oh my God, who did they play?
They
Wait,
tied Washington and Lee.
Okay, because I was going to say we only have 2 career games at Liberty, so I was like confused. how
Well,
there's another
they
game in
actually are
Lynchburg.
13, 11, and 2 all time in Lynchburg.
Tech used to go around and like barnstorm, around
yeah.
the state. Like they would play like
Well, they used to play in the
in
Oyster
the
Bowl.
Oyster Bowl in
Yeah.
Norfolk. They would play VMI and
Wait, did you say there was an Oyster Bowl?
They call it it wasn't
That
a
was the
bowl
name of the
game.
stadium.
Yeah.
I was like, I love that.
They used to play VMI in Roanoke, in Victory Stadium in Roanoke. They would meet VMI like halfway. It was Victory Stadium was probably like a 25,000 seat stadium, something like that.
And there was a Sports Illustrated. I believe that Virginia Tech and VMI were on the cover of Sports Illustrated at one point back in the 1950s. Let me spit this up. Isn't WNL in Lexington?
Correct.
So they
Yes.
played WNL in Lynchburg. Okay.
Yes. A 6-6 tie.
Exciting
It is the
stuff.
closest game away from Blacksburg since the last time the Hokies played in Roanoke, a 1971 34-0 win over VMI.
You ever seen the movie Remember the Titans?
I've seen like the first 30 minutes, and I really need to watch the whole thing.
Okay.
But I haven't
Well,
seen it
the
all.
last game in the movie, the state title game, was played in Victory Stadium.
Interesting.
In Roanoke. Yep.
And they're 62, 40, and 9 all time in Roanoke. So they've played quite a bit of games over there in
They
Roanoke.
played over 100 games in Roanoke.
Have they ever played in Danville?
Damien, I know you're watching. Have they ever played in Danville before? Thank you very much. And then The 2004 Florida A&M game was actually not televised.
Oh.
So that was the last time
sure.
Tech
Right.
played a game that was not televised.
So the last road game that wasn't televised would have
Was
been
that
Temple
game in Lane Stadium?
Yes,
though?
it was.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yes, it was.
Yep.
It was, yeah. And the Wofford game was the game where Virginia Tech threw for over 300 yards.
Well, that makes sense.
Classic.
To Wofford, I believe, is like 90-something in FCS in defense.
They
How are they
fired their
doing
head
this
coach
year?
halfway through the year.
Really?
I think
This
they've
year?
won one game. Yeah.
Oh, I guess he deserves it after.
So, by the way, that 1949 team went 1-7-2. So that was a bad team.
Remember, Tech had de-emphasized football.
Yes, yet they still managed an
The
epic
only
tie
difference
against
between
Washington.
Tech football then and Tech football in 2022 is like, and back then we were bad at football because we chose to be. Right now we're bad at football, even though we're dumping way more resources into it than we ever have. That's the big
Wow.
difference.
Virginia Tech has played twice in Danville.
Huh.
1896
Remember what
and
was yesterday?
1897.
Oh wow! Who did they play?
Against whom? No, wait a minute.
They played Carolina there twice.
Oh wow!
They tied. They tied in 96, 0-0. And then in 1897, they won 4-0.
2 shutouts in Danville. Danville's such an exciting place.
How about this? I'm looking at the 1948 season. Tech went 0-8-1. In those 9 games, they scored 28 points.
Wow.
They were shut out for the first 5 games. Then they scored 7 points, 7 points,
Okay,
7
so
points, and
this
7
offense
points.
isn't the worst offense ever. Okay.
In the history of Tech football, no. Tech was outscored 209-28 that year.
Okay, so it's better than a leather helmet offense. Okay.
So good point. So this is actually more
Gee,
fun
I'm
than
so
talking about the
happy.
Liberty.
So think about playing in Lynchburg. There was no interstate system.
No, you
back
rode the
then.
train.
Oh, that's true. You could ride the train.
Yeah.
So I'll bet everybody suited up, got on the train in their football uniforms,
It's
went
possible.
to Lynchburg, got
I
off.
don't know how fast. I don't know. Anyway, it's possible.
They played the University of Lynchburg once in 1925, but in Blacksburg.
All right.
There's your Lynchburg,
And
Virginia
people
Tech
complain
football
about
history.
playing ODU and Liberty.
It's better than playing in Danville.
Yes, it is.
All right, that'll lead us into our break here on episode 272 of the Tech Sideline podcast presented by First Bank and Trust. Talked a lot about the quarterback situation, the mediocre Flames offense, and Virginia Tech playing in Danville in the first half. And on the other side, we'll talk about the strength of their defense and preview the Charleston Classic. Make sure you stay with us. We'll be right back. We welcome you back into episode 272 of the Tech Sideline podcast presented by First Bank and Trust. As a reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, continue to drop any questions you have for Will and Chris in the chat, and we'll get to those with Carter at the end of the show. Shifting to the defense, it has been the strength of their team this year, and they've had to rely on them a lot in some of these close games. Chris, I know you did some digging on some of their defensive starters' recruiting rankings. Are all of these guys kind of diamonds in the rough?
They're all, yes, absolute nobodies until they started playing for Liberty. So I'm going to list all 11 starters on defense. I won't say their names. I'll just go by their position. Defensive end. 0-star recruit, unranked in Florida coming out of high school. Defensive tackle, 2-star recruit, number 391 player in Florida coming out of high school. Defensive tackle, 2-star recruit, number 335 player in Texas coming out of high school. Defensive end, 2-star JUCO recruit who only Liberty offered. Linebacker, a 3-star JUCO recruit. But that's the highest ranked player so far. Linebacker, 2-star recruit, number 200 player in Georgia. Nickelback, 2-star recruit, number 241 player in Georgia. Cornerback, 0-star recruit, unranked in the state of Virginia. Cornerback, 3-star, number 55 player in Washington. That's a little bit deceiving because he originally went to Southern Utah.
Okay.
So he's a low 3-star. Strong safety, 0-star recruit, unranked in Texas. Free safety, 0-star recruit, unranked in Virginia. So that's 4 0-star recruits and 2 3-star recruits, and the rest 2-star recruits. So they have twice as many 0-star recruits as they do 3-star recruits. So don't tell me that Virginia Tech needs higher recruiting rankings to play better football. No, Virginia Tech needs to be developed better and coached better, and then they'll win more football games.
So who are the 2 Virginia kids that are on their defense?
Chris Meganson, a 0-star cornerback, and Javon Scruggs, a 0-star free safety.
Never.
So they only start 2 Virginia kids on defense.
Yeah.
I mean, they go down to Texas and Florida and Georgia to get their football players.
Yeah.
Which is this. Never mind.
Point made.
Yeah, Chris, you said this game probably isn't going to be a breakout game for the Hokies offense. Some of those recruiting rankings contributing to the fact that they're number 1 nationally in tackles for loss per game, number 5 in sacks per game, and in addition to forcing a lot of turnovers. So that goes to show development.
Yeah, they're very active defensively. They'll play with a bandit, like a stand-up defensive end type. You could view him as an outside linebacker or a defensive end, depending on your definition of both. But he's a very active player, Darrell Robinson, I'm talking about. They've got a lot of guys who make tackles for loss. Obviously, number 1 in the country in tackles for loss. Virginia Tech has done a good job recently of preventing tackles for loss against their running game. They're not giving up much penetration, but they've been bad when it comes to pass protection the last few weeks, and they've given up a ton of sacks. So just on paper, this looks like a game where Virginia Tech is going to be in 3rd and longs. And that's exactly where this offense does not need to be in.
So a stat, yeah. So you mentioned, Katie, number 1 nationally in TFLs, number 5 in sacks, number 5 in turnovers forced. And that primarily comes from being number 6 in the country in interceptions. So yes, 3rd and long could be bad news.
I think there's some sort of havoc rating in defense. Maybe I think there's some sort of advanced stat, maybe in the S&P Plus, where there's a havoc rating on defense, and it takes into account like turnovers, tackles for loss, sacks, and things like that. Yeah. Where the defense doesn't just stop the other team, but they make a positive play as opposed to tackling them for a loss or getting an interception. But Liberty would probably statistically be. They create more chaos than any other defense in college football this year, I would say. I think that would be an accurate statement.
One thing that stands out before we get into individual players is those forced turnovers. Like we said, they have 22 on the year, tied with Georgia Tech at 4th in the country. The last thing we need is another day like we had against Georgia Tech with turnovers.
Yeah, I noticed that in looking at those rankings or reading it in Chris's article that Georgia Tech is right up there, even though they're not a great football team, and that did manifest
I think Georgia Tech is 3rd and Duke is 4th in forced turnovers this year, and now Liberty is
5th.
Sandwiched in between them or something
like that.
So Darrell Johnson on the edge will be one to watch. He's collected quite the numbers his last 3 seasons, including 35 tackles for a loss and 15.5 sacks during his career.
Yeah, Virginia Tech's offensive tackles are going to have their hands full. Parker Clements has played his best 2 games the last 2 weeks. Silas Janzi did not have a good game against Duke. Some of that, it just looked like it was pure communication errors between him. Like there was one point where he gave up, I don't remember if it turned out to be a sack or just a heavy pressure, but he turned a guy loose without even really trying to block him. It's like he passed it off to the offensive guard in the center, expecting them to be there, and they were not there. So I don't know whose fault that was. Right. You know, it's just so many miscommunications on the offensive line for Virginia Tech in Game 10. The challenge is greater this week. Duke's defense is solid, but they're not good on the outside, and they don't create as much havoc
as Liberty
does. Like this Liberty's going to be flying all over the place, going after turnovers, trying to get sacks, blitzing, doing everything. There's just going to be a whole lot of bodies moving all over the place, and this doesn't sound like that mixes well with the Virginia Tech offense.
Well, Jarrell Johnson, like we said, gets some help from Kendi Charles, and his first name's Dennis. I'm not going to say his last name, but 2 of those guys beat out some SEC transfers.
Both of Liberty's backup defensive tackles are transfers from Auburn, which means they were beaten out by a couple of 2-star recruits.
Yeah.
Wild.
So let's go back to Darrell Johnson. He's the bandit position. What is that, like a hybrid defensive end, outside linebacker?
Yeah. He'll probably be standing up quite a bit, but football it's not a straight up 4-3 or a straight up 3-4 anymore. There's a whole lot of in between stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at their 4 guys. He's 6'3", 240. The other defensive end is 6'1", 250. The tackles are 6'0" and 5'11".
Oh, they're not big.
Yeah, so he's kind
6 foot 275 and 5'11", 290 are their starting defensive tackles.
Yeah.
But they're both good players.
So Johnson is the physical specimen of the group, and the other guys are just players.
Right, exactly. But, those defensive tackles, they went into Arkansas against an SEC team and played a heck of a game.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what their size is or what their recruiting ranking was. They're good players. And like I said, they've beaten out 2 transfers from Auburn.
Decent. In the secondary, the top Liberty playmaker is strong safety Robert Rahimi with 5 interceptions on the season. A safety in Quentin Reese has played a role. One note on him is that he's sponsored by Reese's, who signed 12 football players with the last name Reese to NIL deals this past season. Not sure how much we're going to see of him. I know he got hurt in pregame against UConn by spraining his AC joint in his day-to-day. But I thought that was cool. A Liberty player sponsored by Reese's.
I think Bob Schick ought to be sponsored by the Razor Company.
That's
Razors for life.
It's not spelled the same way, but still, just make it work.
With that NIL deal, they get exclusive gear, a gold Reese's chain, a mini fridge to keep their season's worth supply of candy, and much more is what it says.
So it makes them popular with their teammates.
Yeah, that's what it said. It said share with your teammates. Lastly, at linebacker, JUCO transfer Mike Smith has been strong against the run, 55 tackles, 7.5 tackles for a loss this season. And then another linebacker that I want to mention is Ahmad Walker, who is missing the first half of the game due to targeting.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yes.
And he's another undersized guy, 5'11", 215 as a linebacker, and then Mike Smith Jr. is 6'1", 225 to go along with those smallish defensive tackles. This is not a big Liberty team, but don't make the mistake that you can push them around because they've got a lot of speed and quickness, and they make a lot of tackles for losses. And, Virginia Tech has struggled to block slower, less quick defenses than Liberty's, and now things are going to be moving even faster. I have a feeling, without studying them really closely, but when you get that many tackles for loss and you get that many sacks, it's because you're quick, but it's also probably because there's a lot of movement. There's probably a lot of stunts, a lot of blitzes, things that Virginia Tech has really struggled to pick up this year. Now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder why in the heck I've actually picked Virginia Tech to score 17 in this game.
Yeah, I thought that was odd. I picked Virginia Tech to score 13, and which isn't a lot less than 17.
It's not.
But if Virginia Tech's offensive line is having trouble with communication and decision making on who to block and that sort of thing, it could.
That's probably the most disturbing part. Is like things were going pretty well from a pass blocking standpoint, and all of a sudden they just stopped being able to do it in the middle of the season, and it's been going on for for 3 games. Now, if you get that straightened out this week and you have a good pass protection game, then I do think that this is a game they're not going to play bracket coverage on Caleb Smith, most likely, like we saw Duke do last week. So I think there will be more one-on-one opportunities down the field, but you got to keep those guys off Wells.
Quarterback has to have a chance. Yeah. The 4th and 4, I was watching some of the film that Brandon Patterson put in his article today. The 4th and 4 against Duke, Grant Wells had a chance. I can't remember who was running across the middle, but there was an opportunity there to complete an easy pass for a first down, except Wells got rushed and flushed.
He couldn't even finish
pocket.
his drop back.
Right.
Yeah.
Overall,
you okay over there, Nick?
Yeah, I'm good. All right.
Good
There was
to
a
go.
crash from the production area.
Well, overall, their defense has only let 2 teams score above 30 points this year, and it was in both of their losses at Wake Forest and at UConn. Subsequently, the Hokies have yet to score 30 points this year. So that
Yes.
should be
I don't think it's going to be a problem for Liberty to hold Virginia Tech under 30. Because Wake scored 37 on them, but Wake scores 37 on most teams.
yeah.
It's a really good offense, and UConn was fighting for bowl eligibility, so that was a huge game for UConn.
Yeah, it's quite a turnaround for UConn. Jim Mora Jr., I think, is coaching them.
He was Michael Vick's coach with the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, and was he coaching UCLA when they stomped Tech in that? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. By the way, your Liberty trivia is their place kicker's name is Nick Brown.
I was
Really?
just about to say their place kicker is also producing this podcast right now. His name's Nick Brown.
And he does play for the Radford Bobcats football team.
He's a
A
man of
busy
many
guy.
talents.
He's in Lynchburg and Blacksburg and Radford, different times throughout the week.
So, by the way, speaking of Radford High School Bobcats, they are playing Appomattox, and that game in the playoffs, and that game's going to feature 3 Virginia Tech verbal commitments. Let's see if I can remember them all. Marcel Baylor for Radford, Jonathan Penix for Appomattox, and
Tavarian Copeland.
Oh, have
Is
fun
that
with
game
that
in
one, Nick.
Radford or where? Okay.
It is in Radford.
I should go and watch it, number 1. And number 2, we're hoping to put Nick on our sister production TSL today sometime next week and have him talk about what he observes about clearly he's been seeing Marcel Baylor all year. And he says Baylor's is a D1 athlete and just has an insane set of hands on him. So it'll be interesting for me to go see a Radford High School football game. I need to do that.
So John Love is the guy again this week. A good opportunity for him to potentially get more opportunities to prove himself because he only had 1 last week and it was a 50-yarder.
Yeah, and that was a tough one for him because if you know that Duke Stadium, it's a bowl, it's underground, and there's nothing up there like really blocking the wind. So the wind comes and sweeps straight down on the field, kind of like a wind tunnel. So that wind was blowing in kind of from the corner, kind of right into his face. So that was a tough first collegiate field goal attempt for him.
So were we? I don't think we were talking about this in the podcast. I think we were standing around the office talking about it. I sat there on that field goal attempt and I looked at that end of the field, and I swear I saw one flag flying in one direction, one in the other. The actual flags on the video board. And then looking down at the uprights, neither one of those flags were moving, but yet further out on the field, he's got it coming in his face.
So swirling, you don't really know what to do in a situation like that. You just try to kick it.
Yeah.
Getting into game picks, I want to go back to an earlier statement when we mentioned that Liberty tends to have a bunch of close games unless it's against BYU, so that surely factored into your picks for the week.
Yeah, Liberty is 4-2 in 1-score games. And games that were 1-score games late that they turned into 2-score games. They won a couple of those. And Tech is 0-4 in 1-score games.
Yeah, I see enough weaknesses on the Liberty offense. It's a very mediocre group. Turns the ball over a lot. Only 1 good receiver. They don't complete a high percentage of their passes. In fact, if you can sit here and look at their quarterback, he's thrown the same number of interceptions as Grant Wells. His completion percentage is almost exactly the same. Like Virginia Tech, they only have 1 good receiver. In fact, Tech has a better second option than Liberty in Gallo. There's not with the starting running back out, there's not a whole lot of difference between the two offenses in terms of impact players at each position.
Yeah, I think that's
everything.
fair.
It's just I think Liberty is getting more out of the players that they do have.
And their defense is much more disruptive.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what are the official score picks?
Oh, I actually picked it pretty close, 24-17. I don't think Liberty's offense is going to be able to go out there and put up a ton of points on the Virginia Tech defense. So Virginia Tech will keep the game close, but if everything continues to play to the trends that we've seen so far this year, Virginia Tech will lose a close game and Liberty will win a close game.
Yeah. I went with Liberty 27, Virginia Tech 13. That does sound a little high for Liberty, but, we'll see. And David went with, where's David's pick? Liberty 24, Virginia Tech 7. So unless he left a 1 out,
Back-to-back
David,
weeks.
Yeah.
really down on
That
him.
would be
oh, God,
back-to-back
can you
with
imagine?
7 points.
So earlier this year we had back-to-back 10-point performances.
That's right.
And we thought that was bad. So what if Tech did score in single digits this week? And that
Way too many quarters where there's just a big fat 0.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So looking at the fan poll so far, 362 votes, 50% pick Liberty to win by 11 plus. Another 28% pick Liberty to win by 1-10. So that's 78% of people in the early going in the fan poll that see Liberty winning this.
When is the last time that the fans picked Virginia Tech to win a game?
They picked Virginia Tech to beat Georgia Tech.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Even though we didn't.
Yeah,
That was
all three of us picked Georgia Tech to win.
So that's the first time, that might be the first time ever, all of us picked one thing and then the fans picked something completely different.
Now, they did pick it close. They picked Virginia Tech to beat Georgia Tech by 1-10. But
Yeah.
still, we know how it came out.
On a lighter note, we're going to talk about basketball, but before we do that, I'll throw it over to Carter for one more time.
Well, obviously not going to get into this too much, but I did want to bring up Mike Barber reported of the Richmond Times-Dispatch reported that around Virginia this weekend, college football teams including James Madison, Old Dominion, Liberty, Virginia Tech, Richmond, and William & Mary will wear a memorial decal on their helmets to honor what happened at UVA.
that. I was hoping we would do something like that, so that's exciting.
Yeah.
Big weekend of hoops for the Hokies. Virginia Tech set to take on Old Dominion in the Charleston Classic tomorrow at 2 p.m. Mike Young, I'm sure, very excited to get back to the state of South Carolina, and I'm hoping that he brings back some hardware with him.
Yes. The last time Virginia Tech ventured south of Charleston, they won the Charleston Classic. And
Yes.
that was a great final game against Purdue. And Purdue ended up as an Elite Eight team that year where they got knocked out by UVA in one of the best NCAA tournament games you'll ever see.
Do you remember who their player was that was really good at that point in time?
Yes, I do. In fact, I said his name on this podcast
Carson Edwards,
earlier
right?
this year.
Carson
Edwards.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was it.
So that was back in 2018 with Buzz Williams.
Yep.
Hokies beat Purdue in the championship game behind Nikhil Alexander-Walker's 25 points.
That's right. And ironically, their only loss in non-conference play that year was to Penn State, a Penn State team that I believe had a losing record that year, and Virginia Tech may end up playing Penn State this week in Charleston.
Right.
And if you remember, Penn State beat Virginia Tech 2 years ago when the Hokies were an NCAA tournament team, and they smacked Tech by 20 in Blacksburg.
Yep.
And again, Penn State, I believe, had a losing record that year. Penn State's good in the computer rankings every year because the Big Ten is so deep, but their records generally aren't very good.
So to kind of give you we had hoped to have the bracket to put it up on the video, but I'm not sure that we had that keyed in yet. So anyway, I'm looking at the bracket. So the Charleston, what's that, Nick?
Yeah, it's up.
Okay, good. So the Charleston Classic is an 8-team event. They will play Thursday, Friday, skip Saturday for college football, and then play on Sunday. And Virginia Tech opens with Old Dominion, and that is Thursday at 2, I believe this says, on ESPN 2. And a personal rant, so if Virginia Tech beats Old Dominion and Penn State beats Furman, then the Hokies will play Penn State in the second round. And I think I've said this before, I have teams I hate losing to in individual sports. First of all, I hate losing to Boston College in anything. It's this really weird thing. I can't stand it. I really can't stand losing to Miami in basketball.
If you want to go to the Tech Boston College game in the Conti Forum this year, tickets are low as $3 on StubHub right now. Just to let you know.
So anyway, I hate losing to Penn State in basketball.
Yeah.
It just really gets under my skin. So I'm looking forward to the Hokies playing them again. Now, I did watch, to preview a little bit of this, we as a staff have not really gone into all these teams that are in the Charleston Classic. You know, we haven't done homework ahead of time. But I did watch Penn State the other night. And so looking ahead to a possible second-round matchup, they've got a guard Jalen Pickett, I think is his name,
Right.
who, when I was watching the other night, had the second triple-double in program history. Senior guard, really good player. I think he was a transfer from somewhere else. That doesn't really
Sienna,
matter.
he was their conference player of the year.
So he's point guard. So I'm looking forward to seeing a potential Pickett and Sean Padula matchup.
Yeah.
It would be Couture guarding him most
Think
likely.
so?
Hey, he's 6'4".
Yeah.
You want to put your most physical, best defensive guard on him. So it's likely going to be Couture on him. Now, it did take him 18 shots and 2 free throws to get to those 15 points.
Yes. And so let me see if I can pull this up on my own personal Twitter account. So give me a second, because I did tweet out a graphic from that game.
Oh, I have a lot of 3-point stats on them.
Do you?
Yes.
Do you have them memorized?
Basically.
So they shoot a lot of 3-pointers, and at one point in the game the other night, they're basically shooting 50% from 3 for the year.
Yeah.
But one thing I thought was interesting was they had put up a lot. This was against Butler. They had put up a lot of threes and had only taken 2 free throws with about 2 minutes left in the game. So they're an outside team.
About 53 or 54% of their points come from 3-pointers, which is the 4th most in the country.
Yeah.
And only about, I want to say, 8% of their points come from the free throw line, which is like 350th in the country.
Yeah.
So I've run these numbers for a column that we'll run later this afternoon.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you think Virginia Tech is reliant on the
Kind of
3-pointer, Virginia Tech's only 39% of their points scored from behind the 3-point line. Penn State, it's 54%. All right, so if they have an own game from the outside, they can beat anybody in the country. But if they have an off game, they could get blown out. So it's one of those things. Virginia Tech's got to lock them down. ODU, not very good.
It's a very winnable game for Virginia Tech.
Oh, it's a should win. If we don't win, I'll be very disappointed. Because
we're not losing to
they're
ODU
not
in
good.
another sport.
So the other two teams, Furman and Penn State, are both better than ODU. Furman beat Belmont, and Belmont's won 25-plus games for 4 straight years. So Furman's a good team. It's not a foregone conclusion that Penn State beats Furman.
Right.
That's what I was just about to say. To play the winner of Penn State Furman, you gotta get out of that ODU game first. But to my surprise, Furman might be the more likely matchup. I know that Penn State's obviously the Power 5, so your mind jumps right to that game. But Furman's coming off of a 22-12 season last year. Penn State went 14-17.
So first of all, I misspoke. Katie has done her homework. It's the rest of us that haven't.
I've done mine.
Well, yeah.
The Paladins also had a win over Louisville in overtime last season, which, side note, that Louisville game last night, 0-for-3 on the season.
All
Same with
1-point
Florida
losses.
State. Yeah.
And so that was the first time since
Ridiculous.
that's happened since 1980?
Yes. Hang on. I got to find that. That was the weirdest, most obscure
I turned the
stat.
game off. I was like, oh my gosh, Louisville won.
They-
Turn it
yeah.
off. I text my family group chat mad. And then my dad's like, Louisville lost. And I was like, what? I turned it off.
So to fill it in, Louisville's playing Appalachian State, and Louisville made a last-second shot. The guard drove to the basket.
Yeah.
And
They,
it looked
stormed the court,
it looked
celebration.
like it was good.
Yep.
It didn't quite leave his hand in time. So Louisville lost 61-60, and ESPN put up Louisville's the only D1 team to lose each of their first 3 games by 1 point since 1980-81.
Couldn't happen to a better school, let me tell you right now.
You feel bad for them a little bit. I,
I
mean,
don't.
Okay.
Not one bit.
Well, in Florida State with Stetson
mercy.
and Troy and UCF, Boston
They're
College
Jeez.
barely escaped Detroit Mercy. They barely escaped Cornell, and they lost to Maine, who was god awful last year.
Cornell hammered Syracuse last night, too.
Yeah.
Colgate.
Colgate, sorry,
Colgate.
the toothpaste. That's right. Yeah.
Which they
Second
lost
straight
back
year
to back
that
years
they
by
beat
double-digit
Syracuse,
points.
yeah.
So now this we can make fun of them, and I'm fine with making fun of Louisville, but the rest of them, all right,
It's not funny.
It's not
It's
good.
not funny because one of the reasons Virginia Tech was a 9 seed last year is because the ACC stunk in non-conference play. Like even Carolina got hammered by teams like Tennessee in non-conference play. Couldn't play defense, and so Carolina, I think they only had one quad 1 win in like mid-February. Like Tech might have been their first quad 1 win.
Yeah, I
last
remember
year.
that.
And that game was in mid-February.
Yeah.
So if you get off to a bad start as a conference and you lose to a bunch of bad teams in non-conference, it's going to hurt your computer rankings, and it's going to limit your opportunities for quad 1 wins once you get into conference play.
And this is where Tech, because of their history with conference membership, your average Virginia Tech fan just it's in the Tech fans' DNA to not root for anybody in your conference. When in reality, it needs to be in your DNA, particularly in basketball, particularly in these early non-conference matchup. It needs to be in your DNA to root for your conference because it matters.
I think it's totally fair to pick one team that you despise and root against. But that's it. You have to root for everybody else.
Which usually varies between football and basketball, though.
It does.
I would think.
You're right. It does.
Carolina barely escaped Gardner-Webb last night.
They barely escaped like all of their games.
I think it was 62-56.
Yeah. But the thing about Carolina is I'm not worried about them. They returned basically their whole
and they added
team.
a really good transfer.
Yeah, they did.
From Northwest.
So they're not playing well right now, but they weren't playing well at this point last year. And they haven't slipped up yet. So as long as if they don't slip up, they'll be fine. I don't know exactly what their schedule looks like, but at any rate, for me, it's go ACC and then go whoever is playing Louisville.
Oh my God, Louisville and Florida State have been two ACC teams that have been hard for Virginia Tech basketball to beat in previous years, and maybe this year it's not so.
Well, Florida State is they've got some key guys out.
They've only got like 7 players, and the guys
they're probably going to be a different team in January and February than they are right now.
So the transfer that UNC got from Northwestern is named Pete Nance. Mm-hmm. So we were texting about him last night, and Chris says, sounds like an 80s basketball name.
Sounds like an 80s NBA name.
So I answered with Pete Nance of the Milwaukee Bucks, Pete Nance of the Seattle Supersonics.
Like. Well, there was a Larry Nance.
Man, wow, Nance had something like 14 of their first 19 points last night or something. He looks pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, coming back to the Charleston Classic, want to take a look at the other side of the bracket quickly. We've got South Carolina, Colorado State, Davidson, and College of Charleston. 2 of these teams are NCAA tournament teams from last year. Colorado State lost to Michigan, and then Davidson lost to Michigan State.
It's interesting because like Davidson's always had such a good program, but is this their first year without Bob McKillop? I believe.
Yes.
So you just don't know exactly what you're going to be getting from them when it's a new head coach. Or it's his son, I think, that took it over. Am I wrong on that? Yeah, I believe it's his son who is the new head coach. So you're getting the same system most likely, but of course, even though they are closely related, you're getting a different coach. It's the other side of the bracket's a little more of an unknown to me. Colorado State.
Coming off of a 25-6 season last year. It's pretty darn good.
That's impressive. That's impressive. And then you've got your host team, of course, College of Charleston. Who was the fourth?
South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Yeah. So from a personal standpoint, so if Tech makes it past ODU and then the winner of Furman and Penn State, they'll wind up playing one of those 4 teams. And it'd be cool for me if it was South Carolina because my middle son goes there. He doesn't care, though. They don't care about basketball.
Yeah, they don't care at all.
Yeah, I'll be in South Carolina this weekend for the Tennessee game. I don't think anyone's going to be excited about watching a South Carolina basketball game.
I don't think the South Carolina football game is going to be very entertaining this week.
I hope I didn't spend all that money on a ticket for a blowout, but probably it is going to be a blowout.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you recall, I went there to see South Carolina play Missouri, and Missouri held South Carolina to 10 points, and I thought, oh, the Missouri defense is pretty good.
South Carolina's offense is terrible.
And you watched South Carolina last week, and
Tennessee hung 66 on that Missouri defense.
And South Carolina scored 6 this past week.
I think their offense coordinator's Gonzo. That's 2 years of that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, in previous games, Virginia Tech has gotten away with not playing their best basketball and winning in early season games because the level of play is not as good. This week will be a test. How do you expect the rotation to differ this week?
That's a good question. I do think it'll be shortened to a certain extent. I think Tech didn't look good against William and Mary, but a lot of that, like, you're not going to necessarily be playing. Or let me give you an example. Grant Basile only played 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. In that game. You probably got MJ Collins a few more minutes than he'll get in a highly competitive game. So your rotations are going to look a little bit different this week, I think, to a certain extent. How much different? I don't know. I'll say this, Tech won their first 5 games of last season easily. So we thought we were good,
including a really nice win against a Navy team that I think people at the time thought was good.
Yeah, at Navy, and then we went to the Barclays Center and we figured out we weren't so good at that point. We were almost dead even in the computer rankings, in offense, defense, and overall rankings in Ken Palm as we were after 5 games last year. So we don't know what we are right now. We think we know what we are. I mean, I know what we can be on offense. That much is clear. Well, I don't know how good Tech is defensively. I think my gut feel from watching them just through the eye test the first 3 games is they're about the same and maybe a little better offensively than I thought they would be. Defensively, they're about the same or maybe a little bit worse than I thought they would be. Yes. So they've got some work to do on the defensive side, I think, or the defensive end.
And that's the part I'll be watching closest. I really like Tech's offense. I love how they move the ball. I love how they shoot. Famous last words. I'm not really worried about that part of the game. And defensively, I'm more interested in what they do inside than what they do on the perimeter because we know Hunter Couture can defend. I think Sean Padula is a decent defender. I think he and Maddox got better last year. But so I'm not sure if they wind up playing Penn State, I'm not sure you're going to get the question answered of how good is the defense inside because Penn State's so perimeter oriented.
It's mostly like rotation stuff.
Yeah.
It's like rotation, coming off screens, whether or not you get lost, just knowing what to do.
And it's, I think Poteet, Malajo Poteet has been slow to rotate at times.
Yes, absolutely.
When the ball's moving around in the paint. So it'll be interesting to see what Mike Young does with the lineups, who he plays, and to see how they do, particularly in the interior defense.
Yeah, so we don't know a whole lot about the team right now.
Yeah.
We think we do, but as last year showed, we started off 5-0 and looked great, and then we finally faced somebody with a pulse on a neutral site, and we found out we weren't so great.
Yeah, if you think about it, they started out 5-0, then they went 5-10 over the next 15 games.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember thinking,
wow,
what's up with this?
Exactly. So we'll know more about this team on late Sunday than we do right now.
Yeah.
Before we go, Carter, is there any good questions from the chat?
Nothing really today, actually. Joseph Raymond wants to know, and I think I know what the answer is going to be. Do you think our defense can force some turnovers and possibly get some points on defense? And do you think they can score some points on special teams? They did it against Georgia Tech, but obviously got to do that again.
Georgia Tech's punt team is the worst punt team I've ever seen.
That was awful.
I wish we could play them every week.
Oh, I know. God,
their punt team.
Tucker Holloway would break NCAA records if we could play their punt team.
Those low line drives, they get there in a hurry.
And they have to keep everybody in to protect because they've given up so many blocks this year.
It was like 4, right?
Yeah. It was crazy. Liberty, I think, has only allowed 9 or 10 punt returns this year. So it's unlikely that Virginia Tech can score on special teams. If they do, it'll be kind of fluky. As far as getting a turnover, Liberty's turned it over a lot, but Virginia Tech doesn't force turnovers. So what is it going to be somewhere in the middle? Or is one side going to have a huge advantage over the other? I mean, so Tech conceivably could force a bunch of turnovers if Liberty plays like they normally play. But if Virginia Tech plays like they normally play, they're not going to force turnovers. So flip a coin.
Yep.
That's it.
That's pretty much it, yeah.
All right. Thanks, Carter. Game previews posted on techsideline.com as of today. Make sure you check that out and vote in the score poll. Charleston Classic tips off tomorrow, so David will have coverage with that. Jack Brizendine is being sent to Liberty, correct? So he'll have...
Yeah, Jack gets to write up the football game for us.
Okay, awesome.
He's excited.
As excited as you can be. Another great episode of the Tech Sideline podcast. I want to thank you for listening and thank everybody on set today. Will Stewart, founder and general manager of Tech Sideline. He's at Will Stewart TSL on Twitter. Chris Coleman, lead analyst and columnist for Tech Sideline. He's at Chris Coleman TSL on Twitter. Carter Hill and the fourth chair, he's at CBHill03 on Twitter, and Nick Brown producing. Thank you, Nick. The Hokies take the field for game 11 against Liberty at noon inside Williams Stadium on Saturday. It'll be a colder one than we're used to. It'll be televised on ESPN+. Still can't believe I'm saying that. And we'll be back Monday morning to break it all down. I'm Katie Adams signing off from all of us here at Tech Sideline. Enjoy the game, Hokies fans, and enjoy your weekend.